Not far from the day Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood before his people and called Nnamdi Kanu a true African freedom fighter and a true leader, a quiet ripple began to move across the continent. It wasn't a loud event. There were no gunshots or crowds blocking roads. No massive rallies or fire on the streets. Just words, clear, bold words, spoken by a young African leader who had already shown the world that he was not afraid of telling the truth. I remember that day like it was yesterday. It was early in the morning, and Nairobi was just waking up. The sun was peeking through the clouds, and I had opened my small phone accessories shop on Tom Mboya Street. Most days are the same. I unlock the shop, set out phone cases and earphones, and sit on a small stool waiting for customers. Life here isn't easy, but it's peaceful. I left Nigeria a few years ago, looking for peace and space to breathe. And even though I miss home, I've learned to survive here. That morning, a man walked past and said, "Have you heard what Ibrahim Traoré said?" I looked up. "About what?" I asked. He pulled out his phone and showed me a short video. I turned up the volume. The young president of Burkina Faso stood firm in front of his people. He was in his green uniform, standing by a wooden podium, with the flag of his country behind him. Cameras were pointed at him, and there were soldiers and journalists standing nearby. He started slowly, like someone who had thought about every word before saying it. "Today, I want to speak not just to Burkina Faso, but to all of Africa. We must protect our voices, not silence them. Nnamdi Kanu is not just a man, he is a symbol of a people's cry for dignity. What happened to him was not justice. It was betrayal. He is a true African freedom fighter. A true leader." When he finished, the crowd in front of him clapped, not like people forced to clap, but people who felt every word in their bones. As the video ended, I realized something strange. My hands were shaking. I looked around. My shop was still there. The street was still full of buses and people shouting about SIM cards and data bundles. But inside me, something had moved. It was not just the words. It was the truth inside those words. For so long, people had been afraid to talk about what happened to Nnamdi Kanu. In 2021, the world found out that he had been taken from Kenya in a quiet, secretive way. There were no arrest warrants. No legal process. Just a man who disappeared, and then appeared in Nigeria, inside the custody of the Department of State Services. Many believed he had been kidnapped. Others said he was rendered. But either way, it was wrong. I still remember the day that news broke. Some of us cried. Others were quiet. A few said he deserved it, but even they were shocked by the way it was done. Since then, he had been in prison in Nigeria. Court cases came and went. Some judges said he should be released. Others delayed. The Nigerian government refused to let him go. But here was Captain Ibrahim Traoré, thousands of miles away, standing in front of the world, and saying what most African leaders were too scared to say, that the process was wrong, and that Nnamdi Kanu stood for something greater. The rest of that day in Nairobi was different. You could see it in the eyes of people, not just Nigerians. Even some Kenyans were asking, what really happened to this man? Was it even legal? In the Nigerian community, especially among Igbos in Kenya, the conversation changed. Normally, people talk about money, rent, or how to send something home. But that evening, everyone was talking about the court case that was set to be ruled on in Nairobi soon, the one Nnamdi Kanu's lawyers had filed against the Kenyan government. The lawsuit claimed that Kanu had been unlawfully abducted, that there was no legal extradition, and that Kenya had broken its own laws and international rules. The hearing had gone on quietly for a long time. But now, people were paying attention. The court was finally going to deliver a judgment. That night, I didn't sleep much. I lay on my mattress in my small room, staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly. My mind kept playing back Traoré'S words. I wondered how one man's courage could light a fire across countries. He wasn't from Nigeria. He had never met Nnamdi Kanu. But he understood something that many others didn't. Africa must defend her sons when they are treated unfairly. The next morning, as I prepared to go to my shop again, I made a decision. I would not open my shop that day. Instead, I would go to the court. Not to protest. Not to shout. Just to be there, to witness whatever would happen. I felt it deep inside me, this was bigger than politics. It was about dignity. About law. About how far a system would go to silence a man, and whether truth would be strong enough to stand against that silence. And I wasn't alone. By the time I reached the court area, it was already crowded. Elderly men. Young students. Women with quiet strength in their eyes. Some held signs with Kanu's face. Others held nothing, just calm determination. The mood was heavy, but not angry. People had come for one thing, to hear if justice still lived in Kenya. Something was in the air that morning. And though we didn't know what the court would say, we knew one thing. The world was finally watching. The sun rose slowly over Nairobi that morning, casting a soft orange light on the streets and buildings. I stood quietly outside the High Court building, not far from the entrance, with hundreds of others. Some stood in silence. Others spoke softly. There were no loud chants, no drums, no chaos. Just calm, steady waiting, the kind of waiting that carries hope and fear at the same time. I looked around and saw faces from many walks of life. Some were Nigerian, Igbo men and women who had lived in Kenya for years. Others were Kenyan journalists and curious citizens who had heard about the case and wanted to see how it would end. There were even students with notebooks and pens, standing by the gate, hoping to capture history. The court was set to deliver its ruling that morning on the case Nnamdi Kanu filed against the Kenyan government. His lawyers had argued that Kanu's abduction in 2021 was illegal, that he was taken without a proper arrest warrant, without extradition papers, and without being allowed to speak to a lawyer. They said he was a guest in Kenya, not a criminal, and that what happened to him was a violation of both Kenyan and international law. The government had tried to deny involvement. For years, the case moved slowly through the courts, often in silence. But this day was different. People had not forgotten Captain Ibrahim Traoré'S bold speech just the day before. It was like the words of that young West African leader had awakened something powerful. His voice had crossed borders, and now all eyes were on Nairobi. When the gates finally opened, we walked in slowly. Only a few people were allowed inside the courtroom. I was one of the lucky ones. The courtroom was small and plain, but every seat was taken. Journalists sat in a row near the front. The judge entered, and we stood up. He was an older man, dressed in a dark robe, with a calm but firm face. When he sat, the room became still, like time had paused for a moment. He adjusted his glasses, opened a file, and began to read. This is the judgment in the matter of Nnamdi Kanu versus the government of Kenya. My heart began to beat faster. After reviewing the evidence and testimony submitted by both parties, the court finds the following: Mr. Nnamdi Kanu, a Nigerian citizen and political leader, was indeed present in Kenya at the time of his arrest. There was no proper arrest warrant issued. There was no formal extradition request made. He was taken from Kenyan soil and transported to Nigeria without any legal process. The judge paused, and you could feel the weight of his words in the room. This court finds that the actions taken against Mr. Kanu were unlawful. They violated the Constitution of Kenya, which protects all persons, citizen or foreigner, from arbitrary arrest, detention, and transfer without due process. Someone behind me whispered, "He said it. He really said it." The judge continued. The Kenyan government failed to follow its own laws. It allowed, or participated in, an illegal act. This cannot be accepted in any democratic society. The room remained quiet, but emotions were rising. Eyes widened. A few people covered their mouths. I could feel tears forming in mine. Then came the final part, the one none of us expected. In light of this, the court awards Mr. Kanu damages in the amount of 120 million naira, equivalent to approximately 135 million Kenyan shillings, for the violation of his rights. That was the moment everything changed. It wasn't about the money. It was about what it meant. A Kenyan court had just said, publicly, officially, that what happened to Nnamdi Kanu was not just wrong, but illegal. That his abduction was not a quiet secret to be buried, but a loud truth to be recognized. The judge closed his file and rose to leave. The courtroom stood again, silent in respect. As he walked out, I looked around and saw a young woman wiping tears from her eyes. An older man was nodding slowly, as if to say, "We waited. And we were heard." Outside the court, the news spread fast. People cheered softly. Some sang old Igbo freedom songs, voices low but full of emotion. I saw a man lift a small handmade sign above his head. It read, "Justice delayed, but not denied." One of the reporters asked for a comment. A woman near the steps said simply, "We didn't come to fight. We came for the truth. And the court gave it to us." As I stood in the sun, surrounded by strangers who felt like family for that moment, I thought about everything that had led to this day. The long silence. The fear. The disbelief. The exile. The pain. And now, something like light breaking through a heavy cloud. For Nnamdi Kanu, it was still not the end. He was still in prison in Nigeria. But this ruling was a beginning, a crack in the wall of silence. A sign that the truth cannot be hidden forever, even when powerful people try to bury it. And for me, it was a reminder that justice may be slow, but when it comes, it speaks louder than any lie. That day, in a courtroom in Nairobi, justice spoke. And the world listened. Later that evening, long after the courtroom had emptied and the reporters had packed up their cameras, I sat on a wooden bench in Uhuru Park, not far from downtown Nairobi. The city was still alive, cars moved, people laughed in groups, and vendors called out prices as they sold roasted maize and bottled drinks. But in my heart, everything felt still. I looked up at the sky. The sun had dipped behind the buildings, leaving streaks of gold and red across the horizon. It had been a long, emotional day. One that I would carry with me for the rest of my life. The ruling from the court kept echoing in my mind. The actions taken against Mr. Kanu were unlawful. This cannot be accepted in any democratic society. The court awards Mr. Kanu 120 million naira in damages. It wasn't just about the money. It was never about the money. It was about what the money represented: truth, accountability, and dignity. It was about a man who had been taken in the shadows, finally being seen in the light of justice. It was about reminding the world, and ourselves, that the rule of law still matters. I sat quietly, watching families walk by, children laughing with balloons in their hands. And then I remembered something that felt even more powerful than the court ruling, the words of Captain Ibrahim Traoré. Just a day earlier, he had spoken what most African leaders had been too afraid to say. Africa must protect its voices, not silence them. Nnamdi Kanu is a true African freedom fighter. A true leader. He had not been forced to say those words. He had no political gain to make. He simply chose truth. And in doing so, he gave courage to millions, including me. His voice had reached across countries, across tribes, across borders. In just a few minutes, his words gave strength to people who had been told to keep quiet for years. His speech was not just a statement, it was a turning point. That night, I opened my phone and scrolled through social media. Everywhere I looked, people were talking about the court ruling. Nigerians in the diaspora were sharing the news. Kenyans were asking serious questions about the government's role in the abduction. Even people who had not supported Nnamdi Kanu before were now saying, at least he deserved a fair process. I saw posts with captions like, "Justice begins when people dare to speak. Thank you, Kenya, for choosing the law over silence. Traoré is the leader Africa needs." I felt proud. Not just as a Nigerian, but as an African. We are often told to stay silent. To look away when injustice happens. To pretend that powerful men cannot be questioned. But that day, both the Kenyan court and the leader of Burkina Faso reminded us that we don't have to be silent. That we have the right to speak, and the right to expect justice, not just for ourselves, but for each other. As I sat there, a father walked past me with his young son. The boy was holding a small paper flag, not a Nigerian flag or Kenyan flag, but the red, black, and green flag of Pan-African unity. He looked happy. Free. I imagined the boy asking his father one day, what happened in Nairobi that day? And the father answering, that was the day the truth finally stood tall. It made me think deeply. This moment wasn't just about Nnamdi Kanu's personal story. It wasn't just about Igbo people or about Nigeria. It was about what kind of Africa we want to build. An Africa where laws matter. Where no one can be taken in the dark. Where no voice is too small to be heard. Traoré reminded us that we still have leaders who believe in those things. And the Kenyan court reminded us that justice is not a thing of the past, it is alive, and it still speaks. I began to type a message to my younger brother in Aba, Nigeria. He had always been afraid that nothing would ever change. But today, I wanted to give him hope. I wrote, Bro, the Kenyan court ruled in Kanu's favor. They said the abduction was illegal, 120 million Nigerian nairas awarded in damages. Even Traoré supported him. Africa is waking up. Slowly, but surely. He replied within seconds. Are you serious? Finally. Thank God. Maybe there's still hope for us. Yes, there is still hope. But that hope is not just in courts or presidents. It's in the choices we make, to speak, to stand, to tell the truth, even when it is risky. I stood up from the bench and began to walk home. Nairobi's night was coming to life, but I carried peace in my steps. I knew I had seen something important, a rare moment when truth defeated fear. And I knew this story would stay with me forever. It's a story I will one day tell my children. Not just about Nnamdi Kanu or a courtroom ruling, but about a continent learning to listen to itself again. About how, on a quiet day in Nairobi, justice spoke, and the people heard. We carry that message now. Everywhere we go. In our voices. In our hearts. And in our dreams for a better Africa.